All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kari Bingen. I'm the director of the Aerospace Security Project here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'd like to welcome you all here for what will be a terrific discussion, substantive, stimulating, and inspiring, on the U.S. enduring human presence in orbit. Our discussion today will reflect on a quarter century of accomplishments and discuss the future. It is such an honor to welcome the Honorable Jim Bridenstine, NASA's 13th NASA administrator and former U.S. Congressman from the great state of Oklahoma, and who is now the managing partner at the Artemis Group. I had the privilege of working with Jim while he was on the House Armed Services Committee and seeing his dedication, passion, and depth of engagement firsthand. And it's also an immense privilege to welcome Dr. Peggy Whitson, former NASA astronaut, described as America's most experienced astronaut, who holds the record for the most days in space, more than any other American astronaut or woman astronaut in the world, and who is now the Vice President of Human Spaceflight at Axiom Space. And for me, this is a real fangirl moment. On November 2nd, 2000, the Expedition 1 crew arrived at the International Space Station. U.S. astronaut Bill Shepard and Russian cosmonauts Sergei Krikalev and Yuri Gidzenko marked the start of a continuous human presence on orbit that is there to this day. So 25 years later, we're at an inflection point and facing important questions on the future of U.S. crewed operations in orbit. What only governments once did, the commercial sector is now pursuing. This is not just about the United States and Russia anymore. China, with its Tiangong space station and ambitious plans across its space program, as well as other foreign countries with manned space programs. So with that frame, I'd like to turn it over to Clayton Swope, Deputy Director of the Aerospace Security Project, to kick off this wonderful conversation today. Clayton.
Thanks, Kari. Again, I'm Clayton Swope. I'm the Deputy Director of the Aerospace Security Project here at CSIS. I work for Kari. I'm truly honored to be here on the stage for this discussion today with Peggy and Jim. To me, it's interesting. I was Googling earlier today, what were we doing 25 years ago in November 2000? I had forgotten about Y2K. We were worried about Y2K. I forgot about hanging chads. We were talking about the 2000 presidential election. And one thing that really surprised me, 34% of America was using dial-up. AOL was at its peak. It had 23 million subscribers then. And I think, I was just talking to Christopher Ingram before this event. We think maybe there was just recent news too where AOL kind of went out of business. So it's funny, we've really come a long way. 3% of America had broadband then. Imagine, that number is almost 100%, I'm sure, today. Before we really get into our discussion, I do want to ask Peggy and Jim to talk a bit about themselves first. But to me, personally, this is a really interesting discussion because, Peggy, I grew up in a small town in Ohio, Middletown, Ohio. I am inspired by you. I think there are a lot of people who probably are.
Thank you.
Growing up in a small town, to me, it's hard to get over the feeling that you just can't do something that is not within your reach. But I think you prove that that's wrong, that you should never have something that's not in your reach. I think a lot of people think the same way. And Jim, I used to work for Derek Kilmer, a member from Washington State, a Democrat who you worked a lot with on the Hill. I think
Love Derek, yeah.
I think you guys met during freshman orientation for Congress.
Right,
and I just think good people gravitate towards good people, and I think both of you did a lot of work together that legacy is still today and has improved America's position in space. And I was honored to be a part of it when I worked for him.
Derek was my parents' congressman, as a matter of fact. So that was a unique relationship and a lot of fun.
Oh, I hope I got some constituent messages from him on something that Derek could be doing better as casework.
Yeah, I know that my dad had met with him at least on a number of occasions. So it was good.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, both of you are missed in Congress.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
So yeah, just kind of kicking off the discussion, I just wanted to hear about yourselves and your words. I'm sure a lot of us know about you and your biographies and your experiences. So if there's something interesting that people maybe don't know, what's maybe a book you're reading now that's really good, or a TV show you're watching, or just something that is just, I think, would fascinate us. I'd love to hear that. But just how you got to where you are and just your space journey, if you will, would be a good place to start.
Sure thing.
Peggy?
You said small town, and I always tell people the closest town to my parents' farm had 32 people in it. He just Googled it and found out there's only 15 there now. And I said, probably only if you count the dogs. But
And mine was 20,000. I thought that was small.
yeah, there's just, the 32 is what it was growing up. I was inspired by the moon landing and, really wanted to be an astronaut. Thought, wow, cool job. But of course, at the time, there were no female astronauts. So it wasn't until I graduated from high school and NASA picked the first female astronauts that I thought, oh, wow, this might happen. It could happen. And one of them happened to be Shannon Lucid, a biochemist. And, you know, it seemed very real that it was possible because I was interested in biology and chemistry and eventually became a biochemist. But that made it real for me, made it possible, attainable, just by seeing her. NASA didn't agree for quite some time. It took 10 years for me to convince them I was the right choice. But I learned a lot of really cool things in the meantime, between when I first got my PhD and was eligible to apply to be an astronaut. And it's only now looking back on that time frame that I can say, you know, those 10 years were the most important years for me to develop and allow me to become first female commander, first female chief of the office. You know, all those things required those international relationships, the team building that I was doing, and it started off in the USSR and became Russia while I started these negotiations and to develop a joint science program, the Shuttle Mir science program. And we flew our astronauts on board the Mir space station and cosmonauts on board the space shuttle. So that time frame, although I'd never want to relive it again, turned out to be one of the most valuable times because I grew so much from that experience. And I like to remind people, you know, your path to where your goal isn't always a straight line, and you have to really embrace the path along the way.
Yeah, and I was thinking I was trying to think how I would describe your career. Kari gave your bio, but to me I was thinking, you're former astronaut, that doesn't really cover it all. I was like, educator, scientist, and now you're working for a company that's doing private human spaceflight. It's a lot of things. It's hard to just put a label on it. It seems like you've just done so much.
Well, I feel very honored to have been able to be a NASA astronaut and feel even more honored that I got the privilege after I left NASA, figuring I was done forever, to be able to be a part of commercial space and actually have an opportunity to fly 2 more times on short duration missions. So it's just been really exciting, incredible time for me.
Yeah, Jim.
Awesome.
What about you?
First of all, yeah, well, it's humbling to be on a stage with Peggy Whitson, I can tell you that. And you know, we all have our heroes. She is among mine as well. I don't even want to begin to compare myself to her, but we both have degrees from Rice University,
Yeah.
so we have that in common.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, my story was 5th grade. You know, this movie came out called Top Gun, and I decided at that point I was going to be a Navy pilot, and yeah, no path is ever straight. After graduating from Rice, I did join the Navy. I became a pilot, flew combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. I got to fly Red Air at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center for 3 years, which is the parent command to Top Gun. So I was a target. I got to get shot down by Top Gun instructors a lot, which was a lot of fun. And then at some point, you know, I decided it was important for me to run for Congress. And I served on the Armed Services Committee, Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, which is how I got to know Kari, who's here at CSIS now. And in those days, we were dealing with all kinds of national security space issues. I was also on the Science Committee that oversaw NASA and NOAA. People don't realize it, but about 40% of NOAA's budget is space. And so I was dealing with space issues all the time in the House of Representatives. And so over the course of my time in Congress, we decided it was important, and my old team is sitting back there now, we decided it was important that we were going to create a comprehensive space reform bill called the American Space Renaissance Act and deal with all these issues in one bill, knowing it couldn't pass because it had financial services things, had to go through the Financial Services Committee. It had, for example, insurance provisions. It had tax code, changes, Launch America, you get a tax credit, that kind of thing. So it had to go through Ways and Means. This bill was never going to become law, but what we could do is we could use it as a repository for the best space reform ideas. And we, in our congressional office, we kind of became the go-to team for space issues. And then when President Trump got elected, he selected me to be the NASA administrator. So it was kind of daunting, but also super exciting. And I loved every minute of it, and I got to know people like Peggy Whitson.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's an awesome story. Before we get into the meat of this discussion, I just want to point out we're taking questions from the audience. We have QR codes up here if you're in person, and online you can go to the event page to find a place to enter a question. So yeah, we're here to discuss Americans. Astronauts have been in space for 25 years. I saw it written a different way today. There hasn't been a point for 25 years when all living humans were on Earth at the same time.
Yeah.
So we're really looking, that's quite a milestone.
It is.
November 2nd, I think, is the actual milestone for the 25 years.
Yes.
Continuously in orbit on the International Space Station. We haven't done this alone as the United States. We've done this with allies and partners, including Russia. I grew up in the TNG era, not the original series. So to me, having Klingons collaborating and working with the Federation always felt normal. Russia working with the United States on the space station. It doesn't now, but I'm just looking kind of back on that history, and it's a kind of a, it's just a time that it feels routine in some ways. It feels like it's in the past a bit. It's kind of how I feel like we looked at the space shuttle too when it was operating. This is just how things are. But then thinking about the future now, it doesn't feel that way. So I think that's kind of where I want to start this conversation. Did we start to look at that as routine? Is that good or bad? What does that mean for the future of the U.S. human presence in low Earth orbit? What does that mean if we don't have it?
It's a lot of questions, but
You get to pick. I'll toss them all. It's like a salad bar. You can choose what you want.
well, I am, really pleased that we have had 25 years of human presence, and I do believe that, that the structure we built up there is an engineering marvel, but the legacy of the space station is that international partnership. And I think it's been an extremely valuable lesson, one that, we are carrying forward in commercial space now, because we recognize that, the process needs to involve everyone to be successful. You need to have entities from government and entities from that have commercial access. And so to me, that expansion, taking those lessons that we've learned, is really important. And, I think it's just amazing that having something so much bigger than us, a space program, really is something that brings people together. Even, I've been on cruise when he had Russians and French and Germans, and just recently I flew with a Hungarian, a Polish, and an Indian guy. And it's just great to be able to share that experience with so many different people in space. And I truly believe that will be the outstanding legacy of the 30 years in space that we will spend continuously. And I hope there's no break. Axiom Space looks to build the next space station. The Axiom Station initially attached to the ISS, but then separating and becoming independent by 2028, so that we won't have a break in that U.S. presence in space. I think that's very important for U.S. leadership in space to continue. It's just a very complicated thing. It's going to become even more complicated. We're going to have a lot of access, like to orbital data centers and having a research platform, but a manufacturing platform to take advantage of space as well is going to be very important. And then allowing access to all these international partners. So.
Jim, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think your question about it being routine, for the astronauts, maybe it does become routine. I don't know. It seems like you guys are super busy all the time and everything's different. And even when you're on orbit, it's no 2 days are the same. Yeah. But I would say, as the NASA administrator, from a political perspective, it is not routine at all, because these great Americans and heroes, they have nerves of steel. But if something goes wrong, the NASA administrator has to go tell the president, and the president has to stop what he's doing and give a speech to the world, and the whole world stops. So, from my perspective, every day you've got people in space on the International Space Station. You've got people going to the International Space Station, people coming from the International Space Station. You've got supplies, you've got things docking. And of course, the dreaded outcome of a mishap is what the NASA administrator worries about every day. And I'll tell you, it keeps you up. But it's an amazing team at NASA, and I will tell you, from my perspective, there's nothing routine about it. Maybe from the American people's perspective, because they see it all the time, and there's never an issue, seemingly, at least not in a while. Maybe it seems routine. I don't think from a NASA perspective anybody takes it as routine.
Yeah, and when I was thinking of that question, to me, I didn't even know if I could decide that was a negative thing. I was thinking about a book called Station 11. It was about a pandemic before there was a pandemic, and like most people, they didn't survive this. And one thing that we lost was aviation, and how important that was, and even just maritime traffic and shipping. And when you don't have it, it's a big deal, and there's a huge impact that you notice. So to me, I was thinking that its routine isn't maybe the bad thing, but we don't think about what happens if we don't have it.
That's right.
So that was kind of, I'm curious your thoughts. What if we don't have that? And I agree, we don't want it to happen, but just so people realize, what if we don't have that continuous human presence going forward? What are we missing?
It's a big deal. So Peggy mentioned very specifically all of the great international astronauts she's flown with. And we need to understand that the International Space Station is in fact international, but it is an American-led enterprise. Mm-hmm. And the preponderance of the resources have come from the American taxpayer. And this engineering marvel, as Peggy correctly identified it, is delivering day in and day out all kinds of new things that we get from microgravity, which we otherwise would not have. And as we continue to learn and do more, it sets us apart from the rest of the world in so many different ways when it comes to just basic physics and understanding of how things operate differently in the microgravity of space. We can go into details on that, but just know it would be catastrophic from a diplomatic perspective if we didn't have a permanent human presence in space. It would be catastrophic from a science and physics perspective, and all of the spin-offs. NASA does a spin-off book every year. It's usually about an inch thick, and it talks about all the things that have come economically from being in space, especially in microgravity. So there's a lot, and of course, treating diseases and all kinds of other things that we do today that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do because we've got astronauts willing to be in space doing the hard work. So it would be a real setback for the United States if we did not have a permanent human presence in space.
Yeah, Peggy, maybe just your thoughts on that too. I think from your experience in space, doing things in space, people might often say, why can't I do that with a robot? Why do I need a space station with people in it? So what's your thought for that question then? And in addition to kind of the medicine and the economic piece, sometimes I think it's hard to really capture. I think you did, and so did you, Jim, when we talk about the international alliances and the partnerships and kind of how that diplomatic piece and that international engagement, that's really important. And however we describe it from an economic, national security standpoint, there's a value to that. So I think it involves having people, but I kind of want to hear your thoughts on it.
So I started going to the space station in 2002 was my first flight, and I had 3 flights, so 6 months, and 9.5 months, with the last one being landing in 2017. And what impressed me about that transition during that time frame was not only the assembly process that had to take place to build this amazing structure in space, going 17,500 miles an hour in a vacuum, moving modules around, connecting lines, data, power, and thermal lines, externally, which had to be done EVA doing spacewalks. So, it required a human to be there to handle all the issues, a torn solar array, things that didn't go right. But from a science perspective, there was an evolution in the science, the complexity and the quality of the science that had improved during that time frame. And as a science geek, I loved the fact that the more complex stuff required the hands-on, because it required special skills that would be difficult to train a robot to do. And so I think, there's always going to be a place for both, because we want to save the crew members time to do the complex stuff and automate as much as we can, especially as we move into manufacturing things. We want to be able to automate the process as much as possible. So I think there's a place for robotics, but I think we need that human presence there.
And what's your thought? So I think it's perfectly acceptable for America to do something because we have pride in it, our national prestige. How does just having people there, does that resonate with you, or is it not a reason we should consider it?
It does resonate with me, but I try not to use it because people say that's a silly reason. If you haven't been to space, you might not think it's important. Because I think there are more important reasons. I think it's important for the U.S. to be a leader in technology and advancement. And the best way to show that is to be in space. Because you're pushing the boundaries, you're doing the hard things, you're having to innovate new ideas, new technologies to get where you are, to stay where you are, to maintain a vehicle that's getting older and older even, requires adaptation. You know, when the space station, when we first started, we had to bring all the water to the space station. By the last time I was there, we are reclaiming 98% of the water on board this space station. And you have to be able to do that to go further into space. You have to be able to not require that you have to take your own water. There's just no way you could take enough to go anywhere.
I think I saw you describing that to some school-age kids, and they thought that was the most interesting part of being on the space station. Oh, recycling water, how does that work?
Yeah, the biggest component of the water is cleaning up the urine to drink it the next day, so.
Yeah, Jim, your thoughts just kind of on, can we do it because we're proud of it? Is that a reason? And how does that maybe fit in overall to the strategy of having kind of people in space?
I mean, certainly you can do it because you're proud of it, but there is so much more. I mean, that's only the very beginning. I mean, when we think about, creating new pharmaceutical crystals that are treating diseases that have never been treatable before, or taking Keytruda, which is a Merck drug, and improving it so that you can take it with a pill instead of an infusion. And instead of taking months to figure out whether or not it worked, you can do it in weeks. These are the types of transformational capabilities that come from the value of microgravity. We think about 3D printing of human tissue, heart tissue, meniscus tissue, like lots of different things are being innovated on the International Space Station. And your question about can you do it with robots, can you do it with humans? The answer is it's not an either or, and I hear this all the time. What robots allow us to do is have our astronauts in space do more than ever before. And so it's both, and it's an and, not an or. There's a false kind of choice out there that it's one or the other. By the way, there's robots on the International Space Station. There's lots of autonomous activity happening all the time. But that autonomous activity has to be monitored by somebody that can actually do maintenance and keep things going and all these things. But if all those experiments were human alone, it wouldn't work. And if it was machine alone, it wouldn't work. We need humans in space. We need machines in space. We need them living and working together.
Yep.
And the value of the machines, and I'm not going to dismiss the value of the machines. I mean, the reality
They won't be offended, don't worry.
Yeah, right.
I won't tell them.
Look, I mean, Peggy can testify. She's a consumer. She was talking about, recycling water, but I mean, consuming food, consuming oxygen, all these things cost money. She's also not designed to fly in space, and humans are fragile, and we can't afford to lose them compared to a machine. So there's all kinds of reasons we need machines, for sure. And because of all that, just look at her. Peggy is very expensive. I mean, she's a very expensive individual there, and I can tell you because I had to deal with the NASA budget. But I can also tell you that because Peggy was expensive, she was able to do a whole bunch more things with machines on the International Space Station. And now on commercial astronaut missions, private astronaut missions, that make her extraordinarily valuable in space. So it's the pharmaceutical crystals, it's the 3D printing of tissue, it's the growth of human tissue in 3D. Space replicates a mother's womb. These are all things that Peggy has experimented with in the past on the International Space Station. I was just reading an article the other day. China just used their space station to generate new materials for hypersonics. That's an issue. CSIS should be monitoring this and making sure all of our public servants are aware of how they're using their International Space Station to get a competitive advantage over us when it comes to hypersonics. It's material that is harder, that is more thermally resistant, capable of doing things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. But it's because of microgravity. The value of microgravity, we're at the very tip of the iceberg. We don't even know everything that we can unlock with microgravity. But I know this, if we deorbit the International Space Station and don't have what comes next, China's going to have it and we won't. And that's a problem for this country. And everybody in Congress needs to be aware of that, and they need to start funding commercial LEO destinations at the level it needs to be funded.
Yeah, so tell me more about your thoughts on China. That was definitely something I kind of wanted to get a sense of. I mean, they have Tiangong 3, they've had astronauts there, I think, since 2022. They steadily built up from single module stations to this one. They have plans to expand it. You mentioned the work on hypersonics that they're doing. What other things is China using a station for that we should be thinking about, that we should be aware of? Not necessarily saying we have to do the same thing with our presence in low Earth orbit, but what else is there? I don't know if people necessarily know sometimes what China's doing.
I mean, it's really easy. You just look at the way I think about things, and I was trained this way as an officer in the Navy through Joint Professional Military Education, JPME. And I talk about this a lot, and it's so important. Every head of every agency in the federal government should look at their agency through a lens of the DIME theory of national power. Diplomatic power, information power, military power, economic power. We talked a lot about diplomatic power already. China is doing that. They're going all around the world asking countries to join them on what they're calling the Chinese International Space Station. So we're not going to have one, and they are, and all of that influence goes to them. And then all of the globe is going to be using the Chinese International Space Station to develop all these capabilities that we should be developing as Americans. That's a problem. So it's diplomacy. We talk about information power. A lot of people think about intelligence and that kind of thing on information power, but it's also doing stunning achievements, making an announcement that we've done something that nobody's done before, we've discovered something that nobody's discovered before. That's information power. When I was at NASA, we landed on Mars with the InSight lander. It was on the cover of every newspaper worldwide, including countries that don't like us very much. And that changes the perception of young people all around the world as to the value of the United States of America. They don't get that in their own country. But guess what? When we land on Mars with something stunning, people pay attention. So that information power is important. China, when they landed on the far side of the moon, they took out a full-page ad in The Economist magazine saying, we are the world's preeminent spacefaring nation. Like that's information power. So you can just look at how we talk about the DIME theory of national power. China is applying it. All of their space activities are done through the PLA. It's not, they don't have a separate civil space agency. And then you look at the economic power, and that's when we get to all of these activities like regenerative medicine and 3D printing of organs and using advanced materials to create artificial retinas, all these different things that are happening on the International Space Station. They're going to benefit from that. I want to be really clear, if there are legislators listening, China is going to benefit from that economic power. And that's what it is. It's economic power that we're going to give up if we don't start funding commercial LEO destinations at a better level.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you say that, it reminds me, I think it was in 1972, it's a memo from McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at the time, and then Webb, the NASA administrator, to the White House, why we should be, this was in the case of lunar landing, humans on the moon. 4 reasons, really: economic security, national security, science, but then also, I think they called it, I don't remember if they called it prestige, but I think it really ties into the information piece that you're getting at there. DIME is probably another way to say it. But just even goes back that far with our presence in space. People were thinking about it at that level, very multifaceted. It wasn't just one reason. It was many reasons that combined, and that's why we're doing it. It wasn't just one of, it's not a menu. You don't just pick one. You get all 4.
That's right. And you can look at what they're doing and how they're talking about it. And by the way, you mentioned some of their milestones. China is very good at meeting their milestones. We're not, and I'll tell you why. Because we have a very distributed governance structure. We have 3 branches of government, and of course within the executive branch, and I can tell you there's lots of opinions inside the executive branch about what we need to be doing, And the NASA administrator has to deal with that day in and day out. You've got 435 members of Congress, 100 senators. They all have their own opinions on what we should be doing. So this creates challenges for sure. Make no mistake, our system of political process is better than totalitarianism, make no mistake. However, understanding this, knowing what we're up against, we have to be really clear with our members of Congress, our senators, and the executive branch about what we're trying to achieve and why, and they need to be getting after it, because the longer we wait, the worse it gets.
And kind of this idea of timelines and schedules, and I was thinking too, and this maybe is a question for either of you, whoever would want to answer it, but how does what we're doing with humans in low Earth orbit, how does that fit into what else we're trying to do in space with NASA and with the US government? I'm thinking going to the moon, going beyond the moon. How critical is that to the timeline for those activities? How does it even fit in if it's in a timeless way? How does what we do in low Earth orbit enable more people doing more things, or even robots too, in space?
Well, I think for one reason, you expect, to do a lunar mission. Well, how am I going to do that? I'm going to have to get there. I'm going to have to test hardware. Where am I going to test that? Do I just test it on the lunar surface? Do I test hardware that's going to take me to Mars, in zero gravity? Where am I going to test this hardware? How am I going to know that it's going to be functional? You're going to have to do it in low Earth orbit. So just the technology piece of testing and development is going to contribute to that continued exploration. Also, you have to have trained astronauts. You ideally wouldn't want to send somebody off on a 3-year mission to Mars that maybe hadn't been in space yet. You might want to get their space legs on them first. So, training astronauts, but even then, just filling the commercial vacuum where they need to, have a place to develop commercial industry in space. And it's appropriate, I think, that we're changing the roles, that the government-led part is going to take the charge on heading to the moon. It's still going to be done with commercial entities. For instance, Axiom Space is building the spacesuit that the astronauts will be using. It's going to have to be a lot more, not only integrated internationally, but it's going to have to be integrated between government and private entities going forward, all the way through. Because it's a very expensive endeavor, and the way to drive costs down is to provide resources to enable the development of commercial entities that support further and further away from our planet.
And it does create a flywheel effect. I mean,
Yes.
something that I've heard and I think about often is that GE aircraft engines, they got started in that because they had specialty. It was Thomas Edison's company building gas turbines. The government in World War I said, can you help us build a super turbocharger for our airplanes in France? And GE said, sure, we'll try. And they did, and that was the birth of GE aircraft engines. So this notion that kind of the government having a need pairing with what a company could do best, really, that we are very good at building aircraft engine now as a nation. And a lot of it really started with that partnership and that idea that it's combining, I feel like, where we have that. So yeah, I see that too, kind of going beyond low Earth orbit, but we don't have that place to start. I guess, do we just start in a parking lot somewhere in the back of a building? We just don't have the platform anymore.
Well, I think we've done it in the past. We've had contractors that did tasks, but now it needs to be more integrated. The contractors, it needs to be more streamlined and quicker. You need to be able to have processes that allow innovation and speed in development of technologies. And commercial entities can provide that easier than a government entity. And, the government just has to have a need and pick and choose from the choices that are out there. And that breeds the competition that will enable further innovation.
And money too,
driving down prices.
Yep, and I think money is a key. The
Yes,
government has to be willing to put money on the table. And I think, Jim, you
to
talked,
have the commitments for future
so
activity.
that industry has the resources in order to provide this innovation. And I don't want to force you into that question, but I would be curious. I know earlier you brought up resourcing commercial LEO destinations.
Yeah.
Thoughts on the money piece, or just also kind of thoughts on the question that Peggy answered to is great.
You guys, this conversation here was so rich. I want to hit a couple of things, and then I'll get back to the money piece, if that's okay. When I was the NASA administrator, when I first got the job, I did not realize how little we knew about human physiology as it relates to microgravity and the radiation environment, all these things. My assumption was we've been flying into space since whatever it was. And now we're still learning. So when I was an NASA administrator, let's see, we found out that a lot of our astronauts were having issues with blood clots, which was something that and it was a microgravity issue compared with some medications that our astronauts were taking. And a lot of astronauts were dealing with this, and we didn't know it because there was no way to test it prior until we took a sensor to the International Space Station. It turns out this is a very real problem for a lot of astronauts, and we've got to get it fixed. I'm like, how did we not know this? We've got astronauts in space that are having this issue, and it's not unusual. We learned about the reshaping of the human eye.
Yeah.
And how it can result in permanent changes, not for the better, for eyesight. These were things we're learning real time, when I was the NASA administrator a few short years ago. There's so much more that we don't know. And so when we think about what we're learning in low Earth orbit, and astronauts that are doing 9-month missions now regularly, we're learning things that we haven't known before. So if we're going to go to the moon and have a permanent presence on the moon, we've got to figure this stuff out. And ISS is a much better place to go learn than on the surface of the moon. And not just ISS, but commercial LEO destinations to follow. Again, make sure we get that funded. So I think that's an important point. Let's see. I try to remember some of your other discussion over there that I was taken by. That was really good. But on the money front,
And everything we said was awesome.
Yes, it was.
We'll just start there.
Without question. On the money front, here's what I worry about. We have a tendency in this country to think that we've got a program going and we got to start a new program. And so what we've got to do is we've got to ramp down this program and use the money from the ramp down to ramp up the next program. That's how you get gaps. That's how we had a gap in human spaceflight after Apollo and before Shuttle. That's how we had, we could very well have a gap from International Space Station to commercial LEO destinations.
We're not going to have a gap.
We're not going to have a gap. Thank you,
Not
Peggy.
gonna have a gap.
We're not going to have a gap. But what we've got to make sure we do as a country, and as we come up on these moments, instead of ramping down one to ramp up the other, we've got to hold one steady, ramp up the other, and once it's ready to go, then you can start bringing down the other. But at the end of the day, we have to think differently about how we go from one program to the next. It happens over and over again. We end up with gaps. We need to not have a gap here. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question on the money front, but that's just my thought on it.
Yeah, it does. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a really good point. That you do see that. I guess you do see that with the retirement of the shuttle before we had commercial crew. Yep. So
Yeah,
that's a similar trend.
that was a 9-year gap.
Yep.
And it was supposed to be 1 year. So let's not let that happen again. That's exactly right.
Is your thought now then, just kind of pulling on this thread a little more, do we just need more NASA investment in CLD, or is it more complicated than just more money?
I think whether it's Congress or OMB, they need to be thinking about what comes next and planning ahead for it. But also understanding the implications. If we don't do the right things, the cost of not doing the right things is far greater than the cost of doing the right things.
Because you're digging out of that hole, really.
Yeah.
Now you have
Not
that hole
just
you have
digging
to
out of
dig
the hole, but
of.
all of the international elements.
And it falls apart,
Yeah.
right.
And all of the economic pieces that we fall behind on, whether it's hypersonics or regenerative medicine, advanced materials, all those things. So
I'm going to kind of weave in a question from the audience now, two actually, that kind of relate to that international cooperation piece. One is from Nico. I'm going to put them together. It's from Nico from the Space Force, and then from Roman Baladin from the TASS News Agency. And this is actually so in July, it was the 25th anniversary of Apollo Soyuz. So it's interesting that we both had this period when all the humans were on the Earth until 25 years ago, and then 25 years before that, we had Apollo Soyuz. And a lot of that has to do with, again, international cooperation, how we got to this point. So weaving these questions together, success of U.S., Russia, joint crewed space missions, MIR, I mean, you were intimately involved in that. You Probably, I think, did you live in Russia for a while too, for a year?
Yeah,
Or?
quite a bit.
Yeah, okay, so you've seen it first, up very close than probably anyone else here. With that knowledge of what we did during the Cold War in the 90s, are there viable opportunities for the United States to work with China in crewed space programs? And then, kind of I'm weaving in the task question too, how do we evaluate the prospects of U.S. cooperation with traditional space powers like Russia and new space powers? I don't know if I would say Russia or China's a new space power, but new space powers like China. Let's just throw in India there too. I want to even narrow this. We could say cooperation, but do we have any shot? Is there like an Apollo-Soyuz type arrangement in the future with China? Should we just say, nah, it's not going to happen? And like, if there is like a baseline level of cooperation that would be desirable, what would that even look like now with countries like that? Thoughts?
You want me to go?
You got it.
Okay. So let's see. I think at the most basic level, there will have to be cooperation at some level. And we're seeing that already. When China reaches out to NASA and asks about conjunctions, that's an indication that, hey, we're going to have to work together on some of this stuff because neither one of us can afford to lose either things or people in space. So that we've seen that. We also think about, when I was the NASA administrator, we created the Artemis Accords for a purpose. The intent was to, in fact, have China be part of the Artemis Accords and Russia. And because at the end of the day, if countries are going to the moon, we're all going to be trying to figure out how to work together in that area. We need to work on a not to interfere basis. We need to respect, areas where different countries are operating and that kind of thing. And, in an ideal scenario, we could maybe work together on a few projects. I'm not suggesting that we're there now, but, there is a uniqueness about space that in the height of the Cold War, we did have the shuttle Soyuz program. Or if you're in Russia, they called it the Soyuz shuttle program. And then, of course, that turned into the shuttle Mir program, that you were a part of.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the International Space Station, which, of course, so that collaboration started really in the height of the Cold War. So I think that's an important point to make. The answer is, could it be done? Yes. Are things going to have to change? The answer to that is yes. The countries can't just go to their corners and just continue to, do things that are, maybe opposite each other. But at the end of the day, we're seeing that cooperation maybe initialize a little bit because it's just necessary given the amount of stuff that's in space these days.
And I would just add, I think we wouldn't necessarily be talking about a break in U.S.-Russia space cooperation if Russia didn't invade Ukraine, just to put that out.
No, that's true.
So, I mean, there's other reasons why we don't have strong cooperation with China right now. But I
Look,
think the
I'm
Russia
I'm not apologizing for...
No, I didn't think, right. Just my thought there that, there's a very specific reason why we don't. I just think that needs to be recognized. It's very different than China.
It is, yeah.
Any thoughts on kind of the international, how that would look in the future? Does it look similar? Or
Well, I do think space brings people together. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And to have, a project bigger than yourself, bigger than just your country, all of that is an important aspect of working together. I like to tell the story that looking back on Earth, you have an incredible perspective of what this planet is. You grow up in a rural area like ourselves, and that was home. And then you expanded, you went to a different school, maybe a different state. You left the country for the first time, and the United States is your home. And then when you leave the planet's your home. And once you can see that, I think it changes your perspective and your outlook on what we are. I mean, I really, truly think, of Earth as Spaceship Earth. We're out here on this same spaceship together, and it really would work out better if we got along a little better.
Yeah, I think that's probably James Tiberius Kirk would agree with you, who I believe is also from Iowa. On leaving Iowa, you get that perspective. I would say the same. I haven't had that perspective, but leaving Ohio, you do get a perspective. There's more than just small town Ohio. But yeah, I think that is really important for us to just take a step back and realize that it's not that big of a place in the grand scheme of things, and we're all stuck here. We're not all living on it now. We haven't been for 25 years, but still, we're all stuck in the general gravitational well of Earth. I think There's kind of a question that, I don't have an audience question for this, but I was curious. I did have one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Looking at how we're approaching a lot of activities at NASA now, particularly CLD, we're looking at it as NASA's buying a service, vice building and operating something. Why is that good? Why is that good? So a lot of this was done, Jim, when you were NASA administrator. Tell me, like, what's the thought there? And is that hinge on there has to be a strong non-government customer for that service, or does that work even when the government is the main customer?
The government is always the main customer to begin with, and then over time it can shift. But the idea is, look, if the government is the end-all, be-all, it's a zero-sum game. And so you end up cannibalizing this part of the agency to fund this part of the agency, and then there's all these like fights and rifts and everything else. And I think that's a wrong approach to these activities. One of the things we've got to consider is how do you make the pie grow? How do you make the pie bigger? How do you bring in capital that is not taxpayer funded? How do you do those types of things? And so the idea is that you become one customer of many customers in a robust commercial marketplace. And yes, to get that going, the government has to be a tenant customer to get it going first. But the idea is if you have one customer of many customers, and if the U.S. government is one customer of many customers, and the U.S. government has those providers that are competing on cost and innovation, you can do a whole lot more with competition in the market and drive down costs and increase access. And all that is good for the American taxpayer. It's good for the enterprise in general. It results in tremendous amounts of innovation. Star Lab, which I'm on the board of, and Peggy, who works for Axiom, we want each other to be successful. But we also want to make sure that we're doing the absolute best we can to innovate, to compete in a marketplace. And that's what I think, if we do that, we all win. And I think that's what we've got to focus on as a country. Now, when I was a NASA administrator, we created commercial commercial LEO destinations, although it had a different name back then. Commercial lunar payload services, commercial human lander. To be clear, I didn't make that selection. That was done afterwards, and you've heard my comments about the challenges there in a hearing maybe a month and a half ago or so. But at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we're making the pie bigger, and it's not a zero-sum game. That's the intent. And by the way, it's worked with commercial resupply and commercial crew. I didn't invent this. I just applied it to new areas.
Yeah, I don't think we'd have the SpaceX we have today without NASA looking at it that way.
And it has worked.
Yeah, and applying this specifically to CLD, and I'll just say it was just Clayton's opinion, but we haven't seen enough money to really make CLD that critical mass. It's chronically underfunded, I guess how I look at it. And I grew up Catholic, so I'm very bad at quoting the Bible. But I think there's something in Luke that's something effective, like the people who want to build a tower, you sit down and you count what you have, and then you decide whether or not you can actually build it. So I feel like NASA never did that for CLD, and they just will still want to build the tower. But I'm just I'm sitting down, I'm counting what they're putting. I'm like, that's not enough. So I feel like we're in this and I don't know if it's because it's looked at as a commercial service, and that's why we haven't seen the right amount of funding. But that's my biggest worry. I'm just wondering, am I just crazy, or is that we just don't have enough money there to make it that critical mass to get to where I think you both would want to see? Then we have opportunities for commercial things to kind of use that service too. Or do we not have much money to make that critical mass work, I think would be how I'd phrase it.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think it's important to recognize when you think about the funding of the agency, it needs to be better funded. NASA has more mission than it has money. And at the same time, we're cutting the money, which is a big problem. And that's why we are where we are, and China keeps continuing to move ahead and meet their milestones, and we keep missing. So it is a problem. It's got to be fixed. Congress has a role to play here. But at the end of the day, I am in full agreement that it is underfunded. When I was the head of NASA, we increased the NASA budget. We were doing more and bigger things, and I was clear with the administration, you can't cut the budget and do more. It doesn't work that way. I'm not saying that there's not things where you can find efficiencies. There absolutely is, and we absolutely should. And we did that too when I was at NASA. But at the end of the day, if you want to do big things, you can't just cut the resources and then go do big things.
Expect it to happen.
Yeah. But I almost want to be clear that this is a bipartisan problem. It's not this has been, and you said chronically, it's been going on for a long time. When I took over at NASA, I think our budget was like maybe 19 billion, and we took it up to 23. It's still underfunded. If we're trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I agree, NASA overall, but I just think specifically CLD, it's just had even more of an issue with that than other, more, I don't know why, more visible programs. I don't get it. I think it goes back to it's routine. People don't know what they're going to miss if they don't have it.
I would also say we hear a lot about, cut this NASA program and fund this NASA program, and I don't think that's helpful either. Remember, our budget now is about, I say our budget, I'm not the NASA administrator anymore, but it's about 1/3 of 1% of the federal budget. You're not going to balance the budget on the back of NASA. You can cut it by 25% if you want. It didn't make a dent. But what it did is it made a huge impact when it comes to our position in the world. So at the end of the day, we need to start thinking differently. In the height of the Apollo era, it was like almost 5% of the federal budget. Now we're down to 1/2 or less, about 1/3 of 1%. It's a big shift, and it's not for the better. And we need to get it reversed if we want to continue to do big and bold things and achieve milestones that right now we're missing. And by the way, when I say cannibalizing one part of NASA to fund another part of NASA, I don't know why. I know there's a lot of space people in this room, and they all love space. We all love space, right? Let's not fight amongst ourselves. There's other places in the federal government to get money. Let's do that instead of fighting within the agency.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. This is it's such a small piece of the pie anyway.
Tiny.
Yeah, and I think for the impacts that NASA can make, it just feels like it is worthwhile to have that investment.
When you say impact as well, you saw this when you were traveling around the globe as well. NASA is the single best brand that the United States of America has by far. You go anywhere on the globe and you have a NASA pin on your lapel and people know it and they want to be a part of it and they're interested. When I was the NASA administrator, I'd go to events in Europe. I was like a rock star in Europe just because I was the NASA administrator. In the United States, it's not so much that way. They're like, what's a NASA administrator? But in Europe, it's a really big deal.
Yeah, you're right. If you go through any market around the world, you're going to see T-shirts and hats that have the NASA meeple on it, and then say FBI.
Right, exactly. Sure.
I'll ask one more audience question, and then maybe final thoughts. And really, I'm thinking final thoughts. People in this room, again, space geeks, but also people who maybe you're watching this that aren't necessarily so tuned in. I'm thinking also the next generation. I just think we should also be thinking about, I know, Peggy, this is something that you think about a lot. What inspires people to keep doing what we find so interesting so that we look back 25 years from now, there's other people on this stage that are talking about this topic just as passionately as we are. So, that for a final thought. And this one is a little not directly related to low Earth orbit, but it's related because we have talked about how everything that we're doing in low Earth orbit ties into these other missions. And this question is from Aaron Gregg from the Washington Post. And I'm going to ask this for you, Jim. If you were NASA administrator today, part due, how would you handle where we are with Artemis 3 right now? Should we look at something different, a different architecture and plan, and do we need to change course?
Man, that's a really good question. And given what's happening today, it's also very loaded. So I think I'm gonna probably punt because we have a NASA administrator and he's working his way through it, and I fully appreciate what he's trying to do. I'm going to leave it to him to make those decisions. I certainly don't want to opine or second guess what he's got in front of him. And Sean Duffy is a friend. We served in the House together, so I don't want to do that. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, no, that's good. That's perfect. Yeah, so I guess we're about at time. We've got a few minutes left. I am curious, the big picture, what should we be thinking about in the next generation as we kind of close out today? Peggy, do you want to go first?
Well, obviously I think the work that we do each mission that we fly and the publicity, the outreach pays off in more dividends than you can ever imagine. I've had lots and lots of people come and say, oh, that was such an inspirational talker. I really loved when you sent that video down from space. And we need to keep sharing the stories. I would say maybe we have a short attention span down here. So 25 years of something going on, unless the toilet's broken, nobody really cares. Much they don't recognize, because we always make everything, the problems, fix easily. You solve these almost impossible problems, and the press doesn't pick it up, and we need to share our stories a little bit more and be better at talking about what space is and what you can do there. I think it will be a natural expansion as more and more commercial entities open up opportunities, different kinds of opportunities relative to space. And it might not be what we necessarily think it is, and it's not necessarily going to be as an astronaut, but running orbital data centers and different ideas like that might really benefit us in the future and be at the forefront of where we are using information that's so important to us. And I am excited about sharing those stories with young people, with anybody, and I think having commercial space out there opens up new opportunities that nobody would think about 10 years ago at all.
Yeah, I think that's the story of innovation, really. I mean, if someone told me in 2006 you need this thing, the iPhone and whatever, I'd be like, I don't need that. I want my Nokia with the little screen, and I'm not even texting it with it. But then now it's like I can't even imagine living without that. So thank you, Steve Jobs, for coming up with that invention. So being open to that and seeing how that plays out in space, I think is just, we don't even know. We can't, 25 years, who knows what we'll be talking about.
Yeah, it'll be exciting. I know it.
Indeed. I would just leave you with a reality that we can't separate space exploration, even International Space Station, commercial low Earth orbit destinations. We can't separate those very technological efforts and achievements. We can't separate them from the politics. And I think here we're on 25 years of continuous human presence, which is stunning. We've got to make sure we don't lose continuous human presence. Have I said that enough today? We need a permanent human presence in low Earth orbit. There is too much to lose to not have that. And I'm going to tell you something, and this might sound a little unusual, but because I was a Republican in the House of Representatives, but there was a day when the International Space Station almost got eliminated, and it was in 1993. I was a senior in high school. And this was the second run. They started it first in 1991. They didn't have the votes. In 1993, there was a vote to basically amend the appropriations bill to eliminate the International Space Station. And it was a tie vote in the House of Representatives. The tie-breaking vote came from John Lewis, known as the civil rights icon John Lewis. Little did people realize he was an enthusiast for space. And on that day that he cast that vote, he gave what I thought was a stunning speech about the importance of space and how it's like, if we cut this, it's like starving education for our children. That's what it would be equivalent to. And that was I don't know how many years ago, I do public math, but a long time ago. At the end of the day, 32 years, whatever it is, at the end of the day, John Lewis gave that speech 32 years ago. He cast the tie-breaking vote that kept the International Space Station alive. And believe me, it was behind schedule, it was over budget. And everybody sees what it has produced today, and everybody knows that the value is there, and the value is there because kids are being inspired today based on those activities. So John Lewis was right. And what we do right here today, and I'm talking to members of Congress that might see or hear this, what you do today, 32 years from now, somebody's going to look back and say, that person did the right thing for the right reasons. The United States of America and the world are better for it. And we need to keep that in mind. The politics of this are every bit as important as everything else as it relates to these activities. So let's make sure commercial LEO destinations is fully funded. Let's make sure we've got a permanent human presence in space. And let's make sure that 32 years from now, people are looking back at this CSIS event and saying those folks on that stage made the right messages for the right reasons.
You're here. It's a good way to end it. First off, thank you. I'm hoping in 25 years, could we just do a pinky swear that we're going to come back here and talk about this, if we're still alive, and how awesome we are that we've had 50 years of continuous human presence in space.
Absolutely.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah,
Thank you
that'd
for
be great.
everyone also for being here in person and everyone for joining us online. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you.